Hello. Hope you're having a good conference so far, even though it's been a very short conference so far. So you're in the talk where I'm going to be talking a little bit about Aspire. And we're not going to do the regular, this is how to get started and this is what Aspire is. We're going to go a bit beyond that. I do want to do a little caveat up front. It's my first time doing the talk, so hopefully the demos work. Secondly, it's my first time ever doing a presentation on a Mac. So if you see me fudging the keyboard shortcuts, that's the reason. But it'll probably work out. So my name is Klug. I work as a software developer slash software architect slash public speaker at a company called Active Solution in Stockholm, where we build custom software on the Microsoft platform. And recently, I focused a lot on Aspire, because I think it's one of the most interesting things to come out of Microsoft for quite a while. And yes, I've been some form of MVP thingy for 15 years, so I got to see a bit of this very early on, which was very exciting. But let's not talk about me. Let's talk about Aspire. So how many of you have worked with Aspire? How many of you have never seen Aspire? OK, I am sorry to say you're going to have a really bad day today, because I'm not going to cover any foundational stuff. We're going to jump straight into the deep end, but you'll probably be able to pick up some things anyway. For the rest of you, hopefully it's going to be enlightening in some ways. But how many of you know how Aspire actually works? Like not just, hey, you do file new project and you do this little thing in code. Actually, what happens behind the scenes when you press F5 and it starts running? One hand. Cool. I wondered that as well, and if you go and look at it, you end up looking at something called the distributed control plane, which is a Go-based application thingy or executable that is responsible for running your workloads on your machine. And the DCP is, funnily enough, actually Kubernetes compliant. So when you start it up, it actually gives you a Kubernetes API to talk to, and that's the way that Aspire talks to the distributed control plane and says, can you please run this thing for me? Can you run this thing for me? And then it runs it for you. So, but it's still not Kubernetes. It doesn't run anything Kubernetes specific. It's just they decided to use the same API as Kubernetes, which is kind of interesting. And the DCP control plane basically works in a way that when you're a developer, you write your code, you start your app host. The app host, when you start it, spins up DCP as a process on your machine. And then the app host sends over things from your app model, the thing you have configured in app host, as custom resources into Aspire, and then into distributed control plane. And the distributed control plane knows how to handle these custom resources and spins up things and runs it for you. So that's kind of how it works. It consists of 3 executables on your Windows machine. There are dcp.exe, dcp-control.exe, and dcp-proc.exe. dcp.exe is the thing that is the API. Just like with Kubernetes, it's just an API thing where you send resources to. And then you have the DCP CTRL, DCP control, which listens to the API or monitors the API to see if there are any changes being made, just as it would in Kubernetes. And if there are any new resources being added or removed from the DCP, then it's the DCP control's responsibility to run that workload for you. And if you're running a container, it has this dcp-proc.exe that monitors your container process and then knows how to kill things when you stop debugging and things like that. This has got 0 impact on what you do with Aspire. But it was interesting to look into. It does actually open up quite an interesting thing, which is part of my first demo. And once again, this has got no use case whatsoever in any world. I'm not going to give you anything that's going to help to begin with, and then we're going to jump into things that actually make sense, if I can reach all the way down to this Oompa Loompa-sized podium. OK, can everybody see that in the back as well? Or do I need to? Oh, it's cool. So if I start, this is a plain old Aspire starter project. I've made a tiny little change. I've added some things to a CS_proj file to remove experimental warnings. But other than that, it's just Aspire file new project. I'm going to start that up. It's going to take a little while, and then it starts up here. And it starts up, and we've all seen this. I'm not going to care about that. What I want to look is I want to go to terminal. And then I'm going to run that command to get all the processes on my machine that is running right now that has DCP in the name. So we're going to see here that we find DCP, we find DCP control, and we find DCP proc. just the size TED you would find. Now, not very interesting. What is kind of cool, though, is for the DCP control, it says kube config, and it points to a kube config file on your machine. So if we copy that, we go down here and we say kube config equals, and then we set that variable like that. We can then say kube control dash dash kube config, and then we'll do API resources. We can see that I'm now talking to the distributed control plane using the kube control Kubernetes API or CLI, and we can see the different types of resources that are being in there. We can go and say, hey, can you go and get all executables? If I could spell, executables. We can see that there are 3 executables in here. There is the web front end, the Aspire dashboard, and the API service, and we can go even further into that and look into all the environment variables and things that is in there. It's really fun to look around. Usefulness, like I said, 0. In theory, you could probably hack this and start doing your own things and actually start DCP and then start doing your own kube control things to run things for you. I see no use case whatsoever. But DCP being a Go-based thing that is actually not a .NET thing means that they can take this and move it into other areas. So we're probably going to see Aspire being able to be run using TypeScript and Java and a bunch of other things, so Aspire can grow beyond the .NET ecosystem, which is kind of interesting. Now, let's skip away from useless stuff and go into slightly more useful things. So I'm going to demo a little bit about building custom resources and using things in Aspire. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little resource here. So I'm going to use a Neo4j resource. I don't know, has anybody worked with Neo4j? Anybody not know what Neo4j is? A few hands. Neo4j is a graph database. It's built in Java, which means that you don't want to install it on your local machine because you don't want the little Java JDK pop up all the time. But it's kind of cool, and you just do add container Neo4j. The image is called Neo4j. You got a Neo4j container up and running. That's fine. We also need to give it an environment variable called Neo4j auth to give it the username and password to actually use the container as such. We can do without it, but then it asks for a new password when it starts up and a few things like that. But that's the easiest way to do it. And because it's a container, we don't know what ports is actually being exposed. So we have to tell Aspire that, hey, this thing here uses 2 ports. 7687, which is what's called the Bolt endpoint, which is the one that you connect to when you want to talk to Neo4j as a database. But it also, the Docker image comes with an HTTP-based monitor or use tool, like an admin tool where you can go and query the database and everything. And that runs on 7474. So just add that. And also, being it's a container, I'm going to go ahead and say, can we please also add a volume in here so we can have persistent data, because I don't want the database to blow up every time I restart Aspire. Then after that, we can restart Aspire. And if everything works, yes, oh, that's kind of annoying. I'm going to restart Aspire like 150 times during my demo. So having this thing pop up all the time is quite annoying. Now, cool thing is that Aspire actually uses the launch profiles. So I can go in here, I can go to the properties of my web application, to the launch profile, and say, please don't launch a browser every time I start Aspire. So I don't have to close that every time. So let's close that. But now we can see here Neo4j is up and running. And if we go ahead and we click on the localhost thing here, we get the Neo4j instance, and we can log in using the password that I just set. And we're inside Neo4j, and apparently it's all working like expected, right? Now, there is a little annoyance, and that's the fact that if you're quick enough with it, and you launch Aspire, it says Neo4j ready, and it goes green, but then you can't actually browse to it because it takes a little while for the HTTP thing to start up inside of the container, so you get a green tick before you can actually use it. We can quite easily fix that using an HTTP health check in this case. Because we know that there's an HTTP endpoint that we can ping, we just add that, and then Aspire does the health check for it and goes, hey, it's up and running, but it's not healthy for you to use to begin with. So that helps. Now, one thing I dislike about this thing is this thing here. Because it says http://localhost 7474. It doesn't tell me where that goes, what it gives me, or anything like that. I'd rather have a slightly more descriptive URL. And also the Neo4j one, that thing is useless. I can't use that for anything. It's just for me to connect to the database. So why show that in the UI? Well, that's fairly simple to fix nowadays. You just go in here. You add with URL for endpoint, and then you give it the name of the endpoint, so the admin UI endpoint in this case. Then we can go and say, hey, I want to show that both in the summary and the details, but I want the display text to be admin UI, because that's more descriptive. And for the one called bolt, hey, only show that in the details, because I don't need that on the summary display. And if I relaunch Aspire, we now see that when Neo4j comes up after a little while, first of all, it goes red or orange, which we expect, and then it should start showing green. There it is. And we see admin UI, which is quite nice here. And if we click on it, we can still go in here. We can find both the bolt endpoint and the admin UI endpoint in here, but we've cleaned up this a little bit, which I kind of like. And you can also go and build custom URLs. So you can say, oh, by the way, I want to have a thing in this API that points to the Swagger endpoint, and I want a thing that points to this thing, so you can have your own custom URLs in there as well, which is nice. OK, next thing I don't like in here, API service is served on HTTP. Yes, it's development time, so it doesn't really matter, but it's kind of annoying. I want it to be HTTPS. And the reason it goes on HTTP is because it uses the default launch profile, which is the first one in there, which is HTTP. If we go in and we use the second parameter to add project, it actually takes the name of a launch profile. So if I go HTTPS here, it's going to use the launch profile called HTTPS. Now, the problem with using HTTPS is that it doesn't actually do HTTPS only. It actually does both HTTP and HTTPS. So if I want to turn off HTTP completely, I either have to go in and change the launch profile, or we can go in here and say something like that. With endpoints in environment, which is a callback, so basically you give a predicate, and it's going to get called back for every endpoint that is attached to this resource, and you return true or false whether or not to use it. So in this case, I don't want to use anything that is not HTTPS. If we reload this, we should see Aspire come up, and it goes, API service now only has HTTPS out here, but it also changes the ASP.NET URL environment variable to only expose HTTPS. So it won't actually answer at HTTP at all, which is nice. Now, somebody did mess up at Microsoft, because if we go to the web front end and we look at the service location stuff down here, it actually injects the HTTP endpoint as well. Not sure why, but that's the way it works today. Somebody might tell Microsoft about that at some point. I haven't done it so far. Maybe I should. But you get the general gist. Now, the problem is that this is starting to get a bit messy. We don't want to have this, this is why we get NuGet packages that has like add Redis, add SQL, add these very helpful extension methods. And we can do those as well, very, very easily. Now, there isn't an official one for Neo4j, for example. There is a non-official one, but I'm going to build one that makes it look like it's an official one, hopefully. So I'm going to go and I'm going to add a new class library here. So new project, class library, Aspire demo.extension. Like I said, I'm first time on a Mac. Also first time in Rider. Also first time running the demo. So please, there might be a few niggles. Thank you. Lots of firsts, lots of caveats to begin with, but let's start here. So I have extensions. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add a NuGet package. I'm going to add aspire.hosting, because that's the hosting end of stuff I'm going to do things. So I'm just going to add that NuGet package. Then I'm going to go and, can you fold that up? I can fold that up. I'm going to go and remove that, because I don't need it. And then we're going to add, so I'm going to add a little directory here to put all of my Neo4j stuff in. And the first thing I need is a custom resource, the thing that's going to represent my container. So I'm going to add a Neo4j resource, like that. Just going to replace that with that piece of code. So I'm going to create a class. It's going to inherit from container resource, because it's going to be a container. You can either inherit from, so there's project resource, which you generally don't touch because it's based on .NET projects. And then you have container resource and executable resource. This is a container, so I inherit from container resource. And I just take a name for it. And I pass the name on to the base class. Now, there are a few things I know I'm going to need, so I'm going to add a couple of constants in here, because I know that I'm going to need the image name, the default registry, and the default tag that I want to use when I start my application. So I'm just going to add that. Now that I have a resource, I need that extension method that I'm going to use, the add neo4j. So I'm going to go and add a new class. Oh, this is not going to work. Distributed, nope. Distributed application builder extensions. It looks pretty okay. And then I'm going to make that class static, so I can add extension methods to it. And I'm going to add an extension method that looks like that. There we go. So it's going to extend iDistributed application builder, and it's going to be called add neo4j, and it's going to create a neo4j resource, add it as a resource, and add resource returns a iResource builder of neo4j resource. And that's pretty much all I need to do. Well, not really. This is all I need to do, add the resource. The resource doesn't actually do anything. So we need to add a couple of calls here. So first of all, that resource requires an image registry, and a image tag. You would probably want to make this configurable, but not in my version. You get the version that I tell you to use, and that's it. There's nothing else. We could also go with latest, but this works. After we've done that, we can go to the app post, and we can actually take all of this. Just cut that and move it in here. So that's a start. Now, I'm not a big fan of magic strings, especially strings that I will be using multiple times. So we can go to the neo4j resource, and we can go ahead and we can add a couple of more constants in here. And then we'll just go ahead and we'll replace the magic string in here with neo4j resource.bolt endpoint name. Use that there, and we'll use it here. And then for the admin UI, I'm going to use one called admin endpoint name, like that. And we're going to add that to admin UI down here. And we're going to add it up here. So that's just a bit of housekeeping, that we don't have like magic strings all around the place that we need to know about. We actually make them explicit. Now, hard coding things is a bad idea, right? So hard coding things like username and password, not the greatest idea. Now, unfortunately, neo4j's Docker image actually hard codes the username. So you can't switch the username. It's always going to be neo4j. But you can switch the password. So we can sort that out. And the way you do that is you use something called a parameter resource. So even parameters that goes to your resources are resources themselves. So we can go ahead and add a parameter resource called password. Then I'm going to need that parameter inside of my resource as well, for the very simple reason I'm going to use it to build up my connection string. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to add that in here as well as a parameter. And then we can pass that parameter on like this, like that. And then I need a couple of little helpers in here, so I'm going to add, not helpers, but a couple of extra properties. So I'm going to have one property, which is just going to be username, and it's going to be hard-coded because it can't change because of the way the container works. But the password parameter has first of all, it has a default value. If you don't pass one in, I will generate one for you and set it to a default password. But it's also of password resource, or parameter resource. And the reason for parameter resource and a lot of other things in here is that a lot of the information in this won't be available until we run the application, because it comes in as configuration. It's not values that we can know before we actually run the application, which means that we can't just use normal C#, because the app model needs to know about it. Then we can go to the app host. No, we can go to this thing here. Sorry. And then we can go here and we can say, hey, let's replace that with neo4j resource.username. And we can replace this with neo4j resource.password parameter. And then it knows how to take a password or a parameter resource and use that inside of one of the string interpolations to get the values to work properly. Okay, now this should kind of work. So all we have to do is go over to the app host, and we need to add a reference. So I'm going to go to dependencies, add reference, reference my extensions library, like that. Go add, go to my app host, add a little using statement at the top so that we can use my extension methods. We do aspire dot, nope, doesn't exist. Aspire demo, sorry. doesn't have Aspire demo dot extensions. The reason for this is that any project that you reference from an Aspire app host is assumed to be a project resource, a thing that Aspire should run. But it's not in this case, right? It's not something that Aspire should run. It's actually some stuff that we need to use. It has extension methods and code we need to use. So to fix that, you go into the Aspire app host, and then you go to your project reference, and you add is Aspire project resource false. Then you jump back in here, and now all of a sudden you can go extensions neo4j like that. So that's pretty good to know. That took me about 5 minutes to figure out when I tried to build this the first time. And then, oh, okay, you just need to go into the project file and do a little magic thingamajig. Once we have that, we can go and say builder.add neo4j, calling it neo4j, because I have no funny names for it. So that should be it. We need the password to pass in as well. So we can go ahead and say, hey, let's create a password parameter like that. And to set that password parameter, we go to our app settings. We create a parameters object. And inside that, we get the name of this. And we set that to, unfortunately, I'm setting it to the same value that I just had. And there are reasons for that, because you can't change the password of Neo4j once you start it. Because apparently the thing is hard-coded into the data stuff. So we need to be the same because I'm using a volume, and the volume was already there, blah, blah, blah. Just trust me. That's the way it works. I love the hand waving and going, just trust me. That's the way it works. Don't question it. It's unfortunately like that, but yeah. Then we can pass in password.resource, because what we get from add parameter is actually a resource builder, and we need to go password.resource to pass the actual parameter into our Neo4j. Now, there's one more thing I don't like in here, and that is this thing. I don't want to hard code the name of the volume that I want to use, and I don't want to force my users to use a volume. What if they want to use it without a volume because they want ephemeral data? So we're going to remove that, and then in my Neo4j folder here, I'm going to add another class called Neo4j resource extensions, like that. And then in here, I'm going to replace, nope, I'm not, I'm going to make that static, sorry. And then we're going to do ABI 16. So I'm going to add an extension method here called with volume storage, and I'm going to extend iResourceBuilder of Neo4j resource. And I'm going to call the with volume in there instead, which then allows me to go to the app host and say, hey, for Neo4j, I want to add with volume storage, and we'll name the volume data again because that's the one that I already had. Now, if we reload this, we should have Aspire pop up, and it should run my container. And if it doesn't, then we've got 40 minutes of playing or something like that, just looking at my screen, because I'm kind of stuck. But it goes unhealthy at least, and it goes healthy. So it works, right? There are a little bug here as well, once again. I looked at the documentation for this, and as far as I can understand, the Neo4j password, like the resource parameter here, or parameter resource, should not be visible in the UI. It should have an isHidden set to it by default. It's not for some reason. But it gives me the ability to show you the fact that they've actually started supporting relationships in our resources. So if I go back to my code, I can go to my, right here, after Neo4j, I can say password with parent relationship and pass in Neo4j. And then if we restart this, this thing now pops up underneath here. Nobody cares. I don't know. I find it nerdily nice to be able to sort my things. It also means that we actually kind of set up relationships. So if I have APIs depending on other APIs, I can actually show that in the UI and things like that. Okay. Last thing I dislike about my application right now is the fact that Neo4j takes a while to start up. We saw that. And my heart kind of stops when it goes orange while I'm on stage, because if it doesn't go green, my demo is kind of broken. And we can sort that out and not only make my life easier on stage, but it actually makes your time as a developer more valuable as well. So if we go in here and we go, because it is a container resource, we get all of the extension methods we would get with a container thing. So we can go and say with lifetime. Then we can pass in container lifetime.persistent. We run this again. You will now see that it takes a while for Neo4j to come up. It goes red or orange, says unhealthy. It takes a little while, and then after a while, it actually comes up and goes green. It goes green, sweet. Now, if I go and kill Aspire and stop everything, and I go to my dashboard for Docker and have a look, and we look at the containers, Neo4j is actually still running. So it just starts it up if it's not running and then leaves it running, so you're responsible for turning it off, which means that when you start your thing again, it's already there. So we don't have to wait for slow containers to start up. We can leave them running, which I really, really like. Okay, next thing with Aspire is obviously the ability to reference other things, right? Reference other resources. So my API service wants to use Neo4j. So I go with reference, and we reference Neo4j. And then we go, by the way, I also want to wait for Neo4j because of things. I don't actually need that because I have with lifetime now, but it's nice to have. Now the problem is this goes red squiggly line, and it gives you a not so very useful error message. It doesn't actually tell you anything. Reason is it doesn't know what you're trying to reference. Is it a thing that has a connection string, or is it a thing that has endpoints? So does it use service location, or does it use connection strings? This thing uses connection strings, and the way that we tell Aspire that it uses connection strings is that we go ahead and we implement iResource with connection string. If I could get that to work, with connection string. And if we implement that, we get a reference expression, which is another one of those resourcey thingy, because we don't know the connection string until all of our parameters have been set. So it needs to figure that out before it can actually give you a connection string, because it depends on other things. So it's what's called a reference expression. Now, to create a connection string for Neo4j, you need a URI, a username, and a password. We have the username, we have the password, we don't have the URI. The URI is going to be my Bolt endpoint. And to be able to get a URI out of the Bolt endpoint, I can go and create an endpoint reference. Yet another one of those meta classes thingies that helps us do things in Aspire. And we just say, hey, I want to get a reference to the endpoint called Bolt endpoint name on this resource here. And once we have that, we can go and say, whoops. I want to set the connection string expression to reference expression.create and then do a string interpolation saying endpoint name, or endpoint is this, username is this, and password is this, and then it just figures it out. Now, after implementing that, if we go to the app host, ta-da, no more squiggly lines, everything seems to work. And if my API actually wanted to use Neo4j, well, that's actually kind of simple. We go manage NuGet packages, we add neo4j.driver, which is the thing we need to connect to the database. We install that in our project. We go to the program file. We go in somewhere around here, and we add this, which was a lot of code, and it scrolls down to the bottom, which is kind of annoying. And can you please? There we go. So I get this little helper method called getDriver. That gets me the driver to talk to the database. And that thing uses getConnectionString and gets the connection thing called Neo4j. It pulls out the endpoint, the username, the password, creates a driver, and down here it does a query to the database to pull out all the users in the database. I rebuild my application now, start it up. We see that everything is running, and if I go to this endpoint here, and we go to /users, we get an empty response. Which is kind of obvious because there's nothing in the database, there's nothing to return, but at least we as developers, we can appreciate what those little brackets in the top left corner of a browser actually means. It means, yes, it works. But this is a recurring thing in a lot of my projects. Like, we have a database, and for development, we need seed data, right? We need to populate it with data. We need to be able to restore the data at some point and all of that. And we can do that very nicely using an Aspire command. So I basically give a tool in Aspire to go and say, hey, I want to see the database. And then basically kill the database and restore it, and then we can have a new database whenever we want through a nice UI. There are two ways to do this. You can do a custom command, and you can do an HTTP-based one. We're going to start off with doing a custom command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this extension methods class here. I distributed, no, actually I'm not. I'm going to open up this one, Neo4j resource extensions. And I'm going to add this extension method here called with seed database command. And inside that, all I'm going to really do is call builder.withCommand and say, I want to have a command called seed. It should say seed database in the display. I need to give it some options, and in this case, the options are these. There are a lot more there are a lot of stuff you can do in here. But for example, I can set the enabled and disabled for the command depending on whether or not the resource is healthy. So if the resource is unhealthy, I don't want you to say, hey, I can run the command. So I'll disable the thing at that point. I give it an icon name based on an fixed icon set that you can find online. And I have a confirmation message saying, are you sure you want to see the database? We don't want people to do that just out of like, oh, it happened, and then something breaks. And then in execute command, we can do pretty much whatever we want. So in this case, I am going to do this. This is going to take a little while for me to just fill in the blanks here. I just need to install the NuGet package and add using. So in the execute command, what I do is I go to my resource and I look at the connection string expression. I get the connection string, pass that into a DB connection string builder. I pulled out the endpoint, the username, the password, and this means please delete everything in the database, and then create 4 users in the database for me, and then return that everything is fine. Restart. There's lots of restarting. But we kind of need that, and this starts up, Aspire runs up, Aspire comes up, Neo4j is already up and running because it kept running. And if we click here now, nope, haha, missed a step. We also need to tell Neo4j that, hey, with seed database command like that, then we can restart it. If that is my only mistake throughout this demo, which is 55 minutes long, I'm going to be the happiest man. OK, here we go. Seed database. Press that. We actually get that warning I just added in there. And I go, yes. And it goes, hey, seed database succeeded. And we go to the user endpoint, and we refresh that. And there are 4 users in my database. I kind of like that. Oh, I like that. I still think we can do better. Having a little thing that pops up and says seeding database worked is very limiting. What did it actually do? So Aspire comes with some stuff for that already, which I really like. So if we go in here after we do the talk to your database, we can go ahead and we can add this thing here where it says, get a required service called iInteraction service. Now it goes red squiggly line, and the reason for that is that it's experimental at the moment. So we have to go, and I'm going to go to the app host. I'm going to copy my little that thing here that says stop warning me about experimental things. I believe I know what I'm doing. Paste that in there, and then squiggly line goes away. So that's good. And then once we have the interaction service, we can just go ahead and do something like that. So first we check to see if the interaction service is available, and then after that we go interaction service.prompt notification async. There are different things you can do here. You can even ask it for inputs. So you can say, can you give me inputs for these things? And then I can do stuff with it. It returns a task, and it can return a task of information and stuff like that. I'm just going to leave it very, very simple like this, where it says database seed completed and 4 users were seeded. But it shows us the fact that we can actually do some fairly decent information back to the user. So if I go up here, I go seed database, say yes, it goes sweet, succeeded, but it also says database seed complete, database has been seeded with 4 users. So we can actually add UI feedback to users in the Aspire dashboard, which I really like. We also have, as I said, HTTP commands. They are a lot easier, but they require you to have a thing that responds to HTTP. Now we have a thing that responds to HTTP. We have our API service. So what we can do is we can add an endpoint in here. I'm going to do a bit more than add an endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and add this. because I want it to be safe, a little bit safe at least, kind of safe. So I'm going to check, is there an environment variable called admin key available? If not, don't do anything. If there is, map a post endpoint called / or with the URL or path /admin/seed. And then inside that, map the HTTP header x admin key to this string here. Then check if the environment variable admin key equals the header that I just passed in. If not, return 404. I don't want to tell people that this endpoint exists, right? It should go 404. And then if that is the same, I can go and do the same thing I just did. And then we can go to our app host. And before the API service here, we can go and say, hey, can you create an admin key for me? So something that's going to be that secret key that is so useful. And then with environment, we pass in, hey, I want to have admin key like that. And I want it to be my admin key like that. So that should be fine. And then once we have that, we can go ahead and say, add HTTP command. So HTTP command is obviously a bit more limited because it's an HTTP command. So it's going to do a post to this path here. I'm going to do the same icon and all of that stuff. And then in prepare request, before you send it, please let me set the x admin key header in here as well, so we have some form of made up, not very safe safety, right? Security by obscurity is a good thing. No, it's not. But for this, it works. So we go out here. We look at the, now admin key ended up here, so we can fix that as well while I'm at it. We can go and say admin key dot and here is Chris trying to use a Mac. Here we go. With parent relationship, API service like that. So I've added as a child. And then in the API service, we now have seed database in here. And that is kind of interesting. Did I not do this correct? I added the API key, or the admin key up here. I added with environment admin key. Did I not rebuild this properly? Oh, I think I know what it is. Give me a second. Why did this happen? Because it's this. Oh, okay, sorry. This is now going to spoil the surprise. It added this when I tested it previously because I found a bug. Restart it again. Sorry. Ignore that. You haven't seen what I just did. Now here it is. It just comes up like this, and obviously I remembered to put the admin key in here, because you don't remember the last thing I just did. It's underneath here as well. Then it goes and says, hey, for the API service, value is missing for admin key, and it actually tells me up here unresolved parameters. If I click on that, it says, hey, you didn't set admin key. Do you want to set it? I don't like the lowercase enter value for admin key. We can actually make that a little bit better. So for my parameter here, because I'm not providing a parameter, I just create the parameter, I never set it. Aspire figures that out, and we can actually do a custom input and put our own label and input type and placeholder and everything. We restart this. We restart this. It goes value missing, enter values. Now it says admin key, something complicated and secure. We make it complicated and secure. We press save to user secrets and save. And all of a sudden, admin key is set, API service comes online, and we can go ahead and we can seed the database using an HTTP call like this. And it's I obviously put an Ö in there, like a Swedish thing with 2 dots. That apparently doesn't work. You get the general gist. Don't type on your keyboard with a Swedish keyboard without making sure you type the right thing. But the cool thing is, it actually sets that for me, so the next time I come in, if we go to the app host and we go to tools and .NET user secrets, it actually, here it is, let's remove that to make it better. It sets it for me. So it means that if we ever put this in a GitHub repo, for example, and somebody did a git clone, and then they tried to run it, it will go, hey, you missed setting this thing, you haven't set the password for your database and all that. Just add that in there and tick that little box, and it adds it to your user secrets. So the onboarding experience becomes really nice with this. Okay, another thing, if we step away from that a little bit, is external resources. So we can, for example, go in and do something like, let's do it up here. Add external service. This allows us to actually create a resource in Aspire that points to an external HTTP endpoint. In this case, I'm using the api.chucknorris.io that everybody needs to use. I give it a name, and I even add a health check to it to make sure that it's online. Even if it's not my service, I can have a health check. And then, in my API, I can actually go and say, with reference, Chuck API, like that. And it works. And now I get service location through Aspire, and if I want to mock the service, I can actually point it to a mock implementation. I don't have to change anything in the API. The API will still just happily go and say, hey, look, I have a Chuck API to work with. And if we want to use it, it's obviously the same as anything else we use with Aspire. We create an endpoint here. I'm just going to move that down. That's a record to return some data. But this is what we want to look at. I use the HTTP client factory. I create a client. And then I use https://chuck API /jokes/random. And it then uses Aspire service location to figure out what Chuck API actually means. And if we go out to our application, we go to the API service. We go to /chuck. Nope. Chuck quote. I cannot type. Chuck Norris invented awesome sauce by drinking hot sauce and spitting it out. It's not even quite funny. I don't know. Lately, the jokes out of there is actually not that great anymore. That's kind of cool, though. I like that because it allows me to mock things or basically substitute APIs very easily while doing testing and things like that. OK, the last thing to demo in the last 19 minutes, I think I've got, is undocumented. Microsoft has told us that they have a new publishing system, so you can plug in and publish your Aspire application using a publisher. And I thought, that's a cool thing to demo. I'm going to demo that. And then I started looking at the documentation. There is none. But everything is open source, so you can reverse engineer an existing one to figure out how it works. So that is what I've done. So I am now going to show you how to build a custom publisher for my project. My custom publisher is going to be really stupid. You'll find out what it does. But I work in a slightly enterprisey environment at the moment, so I'm going to call it Enterprise Environment. Actually, I'm going to call this thing here just Publishers. Then I'm going to add a resource in here called Enterprise Environment Resource. So once again, we create a resource, and this time the resource represents the deployment resource, a resource that is the deployment stuff. It's not a thing that runs, but it's a resource and it's responsible for publishing our application. So when you do Aspire publish, it will use this thing to do the thing. So I inherit from resource and I mark it with iCompute environment resource so that Aspire knows that this is a publisher thing where I can publish things to. And then in the constructor, you add an annotation called a publishing callback annotation as an annotation to this resource. And then that takes a callback to an async method that called, in this case, publish async, that takes a publishing context in where you can do your publishing. Now, if only it was that simple. Trust me, we're going down the rabbit hole of weird stuff here, but bear with me. I'm going to do it step by step. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to add an extension method to be able to add this publisher to my app model. So I'm going to go and add a new class in here, and we're going to do a distributed application builder. That didn't come out right. Builder extensions class. And then how about we just ignore what I named it and paste a whole new one in there. So it's an extension method called add enterprise environment. There are already ones called like add compose environment, Docker compose environment, add web app environment, add Kubernetes environment, and they are built like for real and they actually work, not like this thing I'm going to build, which won't work and it's really, but it shows you the general gist. So add enterprise environment, it takes a name, it extends iDistributed builder, and the first thing I do is I create an enterprise environment resource, that resource that I just showed you. I give it a name, and then it looks at the execution context to say, are we in run mode at the moment? Which basically means we're running the application using like F5 or debug. Then I don't need this. So I call builder.createResourceBuilder to create a resource builder that I can return, but that isn't attached to the current app model. So it's a thing over here that isn't actually showing up in your Aspire document, Aspire dashboard. If we're not in run mode, then I add it as a resource to the app model for me, so I can use it. With that in place, I can go to my app host. Nope, not that thing. I can go to my app host. I can go to my app host. There it is. And then we can say builder.add enterprise environment, and we'll call it demo, like that. Now, in theory, this kind of works. If I went and said, hey, I want to publish this, it would call my publishing callback async thingy. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't help very much. But we often want to go and say, hey, these resources are available in that model. I want to add corresponding deployment resources, basically things that are specifically for deployment so we can add other information to it, things that are specific to our deployment. And the way that you can do that is using something called Aspire lifecycle hooks. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new class here. I'm going to call it Enterprise Environment Lifecycle Hooks. That looks pretty decent. Doesn't really matter because I'm replacing it with that. So it's a class, it's going to have dependency injection built in, so I can go and say, hey, can you inject the execution context for me, like the current situation of what Aspire is doing? And then I'm going to implement the iDistributed application lifecycle hook. Now that thing has three methods. That was not what I wanted. That you can implement, but because it uses default implementations, it doesn't ask you to implement them. But it allows you to implement before start async, after endpoints allocated async, and after resources created async. Now, for me, I want to implement the down here, AI 39. I want to implement the before start async. So this is when all of the app resources or all the resources have been added to the app model, and it's about to start up. This is where we can go in and do stuff. The first I want to do in here is check if we're in publishing mode. If we're not in publishing mode, we just return. This should never happen in the way that I'm building it, but we might as well check it. Then afterwards, I have access to the... Nope, that wasn't what I wanted. I want 40 to begin with. There it is. Nope, 41. Oh, sorry, it's me. There it is. I go to the app model and I say, hey, look at all of the resources and get the resources of type enterprise environment resource, the thing I just created and added using my extension method, and get the first or default of those out of the app model. If there are none of those, then something has gone wrong and I'm just going to return. So that's just another safety check. And then we can go and say, get compute resources. So we can ask the app model and say, can you give me back all the app resources in the app model right now that are some form of compute resource, so an executable resource or a container resource or a project resource, and give those back to me so I can play with them. Okay, I'm going to keep playing with those. So what we're going to do is I need some extra classes here. So I'm going to add a little thing here before we carry on. I'm going to go and say enterprise environment resources. Just going to replace that with this. So what I'm doing, I'm creating my own custom resource here. It implements or inherits from resource, implements iResource with parent, and it has this target resource where it basically says, hey, this is the thing that I'm actually corresponding to. So I'm the deployment part of this other resource here, and it tells it, hey, the parent for this thing is the enterprise environment resource, a thing that we're going to use later on. This is abstract. It's then inherited into enterprise project resource and enterprise container resource. So for project resources, I'll create the enterprise project one. For container resources, I'll create an enterprise container resource. And in the container one, I get some helper methods like get ports. And this can look at the target resource to try and get the endpoints and look at the ports and give me the ports that have been mapped into the container. And I can also use the try get container mounts to get the mounts out of my container, for example. Now, if you feel like this is kind of flying over your head, code is available after the session, so you can go back and have a look at it. I'm just going to show you the general gist of how to do it. So in here, inside my get compute resources, I can go ahead and say, do a little switch statement and say, so for each one of the resources, if it's a project resource, create an enterprise project resource. If it's a container resource, return an enterprise container resource. If it's something else, throw an exception, because I don't support that. And then finally here, we can say, for that resource, the original resource, like my API service, for example, I want to add an annotation called deployment target annotation, which says, hey, so for this resource, there is a deployment target. It will be deployed here. I point towards my custom resource type here, and then I tell it that the compute environment that it needs to be deployed to is this thing here. So basically, I'm saying deploy every single resource, compute resource in this project to the same environment. A more advanced publisher can go and say, publish these two things here to Kubernetes, but publish these two things to this thing over here. I'm just going to steamroll the whole thing and publish it in my own enterprise version instead. So keeping it as simple as I can. Now, with that lifecycle hook, I have to add that as well. So I'm going back to my extension method, and then down here, if we are in publishing mode, we can go ahead and add that lifecycle hook to our services so that Aspire can find it. Now, before I go and do any more, I do need to do two more things before I can start publishing. So my enterprise publisher is in an enterprise environment, and in enterprise environments, you don't get to do anything as a developer, right? So mine is going to generate an email that I'm going to send to the IT department to tell them to do stuff for me. It's kind of how it works where I work right now. You go and say, hey, can you do that for me? So that's what my publisher is going to do. And for that, I need to be able to add a recipient and a sender of the email, so we can add information to the email as such. So to do that, I'm going to use some custom annotations. So I'm going to go ahead and add a class in here called Enterprise Environment Annotations. Annotations, like that. And they are going to look like this. So there are two iResource annotations, one called Enterprise Environment Recipient Annotation that has a name and an email. This is the person I'm going to email to tell him to do stuff for me. And the sender is just a name so that I can say who sent this email. Once I have those annotations in place, I can go to my, it's not supposed to be in here, but I'm going to add it in here anyway, so I don't have to create another class. But I'm going to add two extension methods here that extends Enterprise Environment Resource Builder, or iResource Builder of Enterprise Environment Resource, called with sender that just adds one of those annotations there, and with recipient that adds one of these annotations to my publishing resource. Which means that after I've added this thing up here, add enterprise environment, I can go ahead and say, with recipient John at the itdepartment.com, and with sender Chris. Sweet, now we can look at the actual publishing, which is not going to be very useful, but it at least show you what you need to do. So in publish async, the first thing I do is I verify that I'm in publish mode, otherwise I pull out again. Once again, should never happen, but we might as well do it defensively. Then I go ahead and I ask the app model that, hey, do you have any resources where the deployment target annotation targets me, which basically has me as the target deployment thing. And then can you please pull out the deployment target if you do, and then also, I only want the project ones, or I only want the container ones. So I can basically pull out my custom resource, say, these are the container ones, these are the project ones that I need to deploy. I also need a little helper class here, so I'm just going to go ahead and add a little email helper class. It's really stupid, but it's needed. We're going to move that to a separate file. It's just a little string builder thingy that allows me to say, like, add greeting, add resource, add signature, and things like that to be able to build up an email message over time. And once I have that, I can go and create one of those. So I just create a new email content builder. And I like the fact that they've done some thinking around this part. So when you're publishing, this is done in the console using the CLI. So we want to be able to report back what is actually happening. And to do that, they have this thing called the activity reporter. So on the context for our publishing, we get this activity report where we can actually go and say, here are steps and tasks that I need to do and whether or not they succeeded, and I can give feedback. So I'm going to start a new step here called compose email, because that's the first thing that I need to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and, nope, 55. I'm going to go and ask for any resource, or sorry, any annotation of the type enterprise environment recipient annotation to get the recipient. If I find one, I say, I found it, this is name and email. Otherwise, hey, I didn't find it, but everything went well anyway, so I'm going to go succeeded async, because I don't really care if I find one or not. I have fallback code that goes dear IT person instead of John, so still works. Then, hey, we need a little friendly greeting, so I do another task in here. And in that task, I just do add greeting. I pass in the potential name. And then, as I said, I have the fallback of going actual name or IT person to be nice. And then, hey, that succeeded as well. Then we can go and say, are there any project resources that needs to be deployed? If there are, create another task saying adding required IIS apps to email. Then for each one of the resources, they are added to the content builder. Then I do succeeded again. And then we do the same thing for container resources. Now inside add resource for container here, if we go F12, it actually goes and says, hey, it finds the image being used by pulling out the container image annotation for that resource. Then it uses the get ports and get mounts to get the ports and mounts that I need for my container and things like that. And then we can add a little, get the sender down here. So we go and pull out the enterprise environment sender annotation so we can get the sender for the email. And finally, we need to add a signature. So we add a little signature at the end where it says / Chris or something like that. I'm not well versed enough to write something like dear or regards or whatever at the end of it. I'm just / Chris, fine enough. Now we do need to send this email, and because I'm on stage and I don't want to depend on an email server, sending an email means creating a 61 is creating a step called send email in quotes, and then all it really does, it takes the email content and adds it to a TXT file that we can look at. Now, 3 minutes to go. I go to my terminal. We go Aspire, and this is also worth mentioning. There's a custom CLI for Aspire that can help you because apparently every single project in the world needs its own CLI to do things. I'm not going to say anything, but it works. We do Aspire publish. So what's going to happen now is Aspire is going to build our project. I'm going to add my target, the enterprise environment resource. I'm going to add the lifecycle hook. The lifecycle, Aspire is going to do its thing. The lifecycle hook is going to kick in and figure out all of the resources and create these other enterprise resources I created. Then it's going to go and look at the publish async callback based on the publish callback annotation. Call that method. That method is going to go on through the app model and basically go through and figure out everything needed for the publish step to work based on the annotation and resources. And it outputs here, compose email. It tells me that it worked with all of it, get recipient, add friendly greeting, adding required IS apps, get sender, add signatures, send email, email content written to, and we do cat email. And it says, dear John, we need to deploy our solution, and because of this, we need some stuff from you. Here are the specifics. We need the following iOS web apps, API service and web front end. We also need the following containers, Neo4j, it has the actual image and tag, the different ports we mapped through, and the mount that we need to put in there as well. And then I can obviously send this, and then he can email me back, and we can publish it together I don't know. Very cute story. It's never going to work. But being that they didn't add any documentation on how to do this is how you do it. It sucks. And you don't want to do it yourself. You do want to use something because once you start getting into getting connection strings and environment variables and everything being worked out, it's actually a slightly complicated thing to build. I talked to David Fowler about this and said, hey, are there any documentations on building your own publishers? And he went, nope, no docs. But it's open source. And then we had a conversation, and he went, it's not easy to build one. No shit. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to have the code, it's available at that address. If you like the talk, please put some greens in the box. If you didn't like the talk, please come up and tell me why, and then put a green in the box. Thank you, guys. And I will be around if you have any questions. So if you want to come up and give me feedback on the session, that would be very much appreciated. If you have any questions, just come up and ask me. I'll be here for the entire conference.